Hey and welcome to the Creative Odyssey podcast, a podcast about entrepreneurship, creativity, and personal growth by me, Emil Ruth. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. So I'm here with Michael Spicher. And Michael, how are you?
Good. Thank you for having me.
So just for the listener, why don't you just introduce yourself? Who are you?
Well, as you said, my name is Michael. I'm a trained philosopher, but I do my work more in the public rather than in the academy. And so I work with individuals and businesses as a consultant, and I specifically focus on aesthetics. So I bring ideas from aesthetics into business for example, with a workshop I created called Aesthetics at Work, where I basically two parts. First part is sort of why human beings need aesthetics in their lives. And then the second part is why that matters for businesses as well. So I do a lot of writing for different contexts, beauty industry, fashion, architecture, and then, business more broadly.
Yeah, I've seen that you have a publication on digital fashion, but first off, how did you get into that field specifically?
The aesthetics, you mean?
Yeah.
Sometimes a comment that a professor makes offhand that maybe even has nothing to do with class, like the class you're in, can have a huge influence on students. And so that happened to me about 4 years ago, something like that. A professor in a course I was taking, and the course had nothing to do with aesthetics or art. And he was giving an example, and he just simply said something about beauty couldn't possibly be only in the eye of the beholder. And then he moved on. And this piqued my curiosity. I was like, wait a second, what does he mean by this? And so I had never even heard of aesthetics as a possible field of study from any discipline, let alone philosophy. Yeah. And so I went up to him after class and I was like, what did you mean by this? And he presents this argument to me, and I didn't know hardly anything at that point about philosophy. And so I had nothing really smart to say back, but it influenced me. And basically since about 2001 or 2, I've been studying aesthetics. So, and incorporating it into my my research and my practical projects and so on.
Yeah, I would have guessed that aesthetics mostly come from fields like arts or design. I do know briefly that it's a part of philosophy to think about what is beauty in general, not only subjective. But the term aesthetics really just came up recently, even like 5 years ago, when something aesthetic, and it's just the way you would look up something at maybe Pinterest or something, and we'll just look for something that looks nice. But what does aesthetics mean really? So is there kind of a brief explanation?
Yeah.
From your side?
Just to piggyback on what you said, in 2023, I was interviewed by Glamour magazine because they were doing an article on the fact that what is my aesthetic was one of the biggest questions that year on social media. And so aesthetics is sort of one of those ambiguous words in a lot of different contexts. I mean, I don't think it's actually that ambiguous, but it kind of is used in a lot of different ways. So like I've heard from different colleagues that in design, it just sort of means making something pretty. Like once you make it work, then you make it pretty. And to me, it actually comes down more to experience. So for me, I focus more on the idea of aesthetic experience rather than just aesthetic by itself. And so what that means is we're constantly surrounded by aesthetic features in our just by existing, so which that alone isn't all that interesting or deep or whatever. But the fact that we don't think about it the same way is a bit of a problem.
Mm.
So even philosopher John Dewey wrote a book in 1934, I believe, called Art as Experience. And he talks about how when we go to a museum and we see like pottery or other kinds of objects, even paintings and sculptures had a different kind of function than just to be looked at. They often were functional objects that part of people's daily lives, but because we put them in museums behind glass, it kind of sends this message that they're something separate.
Yeah.
And even when I ask people, think about an aesthetic experience you had, and when I teach students and ask them this question, they always refer to something that's a much more lofty experience. And that makes sense for that question for some other reasons, but it also, like most people don't often think that just the nice the nice coffee cup that you spent more money on than you normally would have, or than most people might, or something like that adds just a touch of aesthetics to your life. And so one of the things that I work on is that it's the experience that is constantly around us and it's influencing us. So people have projected that we spend about 90% of our time inside now. Mm. Our bodies are not used to that. And so it has an effect on us. So anyway, so to kind of sum up, I would say aesthetic experience is the like our experience of the sensual or perceptual world around us and how it affects us positively and negatively is sort of maybe the definition I would give.
Yeah. Thank you for this kind of ride from aesthetics, from being just a certain look to expect like a certain design language or some patterns that are familiar to another, and something that is just pretty. So aesthetics is more like the way of perception rather than it is the look of itself.
And to clarify, it goes a little bit beyond just perception too, because it's one of the core criteria for human flourishing. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about like well-being has been kind of a big buzzword. And I think positive aesthetic experience is absolutely crucial for our well-being. And I remember actually before I had any of the vocabulary I have now, I went on this little trip to a city to help this nonprofit for a week, like hand out food to homeless people and different things. And they had this regular program for children, and they had a kind of a system where they would kind of walk through these different streets and blocks to kind of gather these kids to this one spot for this Saturday program. And I remember walking into these public housing buildings, and I felt instantly oppressed by it. Mm. I didn't know what to make of it at the time because I didn't have the means of talking about it, but or even the knowledge that what was happening. But it was the kind of thing where you wondered, how could you possibly feel any hope or happiness here? Even though, yes, it's technically better than being homeless, living in like having a roof, but it was so oppressive and dark and dismal that it seemed impossible that you could have any hope at all that your life could get better living there. And I remember thinking that pretty vividly. And so positive aesthetic experience is something that's, yes, it's nice to have, but it also is crucial for our overall well-being and happiness.
Yeah, you would probably think that anything beyond the functionality is just something extra, or even something luxurious even. So anything that is more than just functional is basically just over the top and something that we don't actually need. Or at least this is some way of my experience on how aesthetic things is maybe, if you or I don't know if the term fits here, but aesthetic things or stuff is something you don't actually need, but something you would like to have and would make your life more beautiful, but it's just beyond the function.
Yeah, actually, it's one of the interesting things about that is even something that I read in the last few years on the aesthetics of healthcare environments. I read this article, and I kind of when I started reading, I kind of expected to talk about the space of hospitals, and it did. But one of the things that surprised me about this article was it talked about the communications, and I never really thought about that in this way. And the different way was, yes, it's more pleasant. So if you walk into a shop and the owner of the shop, grunts at you and says, "What do you want?" Like, obviously you might just turn around and leave. So obviously them, you walking in and them saying, "Hey, how are you doing today?" Like, that's a little bit more pleasant, but it goes beyond pleasantness. What this article was saying is the research, I think, is still a little bit new enough where they haven't fine-tuned some of the results as best they can. But what this new research was suggesting was that elegant communication is actually just more efficient. So it is more pleasant, but it's actually more efficient. And I think we do tend to have this idea. I was at this event a few years ago called the Intentional Spaces Summit in DC, sponsored by Johns Hopkins University's Arts and Mind Lab. And there was one of the presenters was talking about this hospital they were building. I forget what country, but a country in Africa. And when they were basically almost done, like, they were really using some amazing aesthetics to this. I remember the photos were really impressive. Some people from the like nearby, like, town or village or came or were kind of walking by, and they said, "Well, who's this building for?" And he and his team were like, "Well, this is for you guys. Like, this is for you."
Yeah.
And they couldn't believe it because they felt it was like, it was too beautiful, so it couldn't possibly be for them. So we have this kind of idea that things that are for are beautiful or whatever are for the elite or so on, or special occasions. But we need to integrate these things into our daily lives and be much more aware of the effect of it. And I have tons of examples of this, but I won't keep going. But I think those are some of the more specific ones about functionality and about it being, and we also just know that in the context of healthcare, rooms that have natural elements or views to, like, if you're in the right place, like, obviously cities are a little bit hard to do this with, but if you're if your hospital is like out like a more rural area, and you have patients can see trees and plants and stuff and so on, people heal quicker. So it does actually serve a very practical value for hospitals that when hospital beds are such a hot commodity, you can get people out of the hospital quicker with access to nature.
Yeah, I've read something similar, and not because of these studies, but I do have some plants here in my workspace. You can probably see them, but it is like common sense that they just cheer us up and make you feel better. But on the contrary, dying plants are worse than no plants. I've read. Yeah.
Well, so the good news is, I know, because of my own background, I tend to be more of maybe a purist in some sense. But the good news about that is studies that have looked at artificial plants or even abstract patterns that kind of have a similarity to nature have the same effect as real plants. So if someone's, not someone, I know people that are like, I have a plant and I kill it. I can't keep a plant alive. So that's the good news, is that you don't have to actually worry about that. You can have artificial plants. They did in elementary schools. They did some kind of studies about blinds in windows where they're kind of this like a whitish or off-white color in urban environments. And when the blind is or the shade is closed, and it kind of, some of the light from outside comes in, built into the blind is a fake shadow of a tree. But when you open the blinds, there's no trees because you're in an urban environment, and but it had the same effect as if there were trees out there. And so just like these little things that we can do that add stuff, like add positive benefits that really don't require keeping plants alive. So that's the nice thing about it is that you don't have to be a purist.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, if you can have most of the positive effects, I mean, maybe besides the, I don't know what they're called, the polyphenols or some of these smell molecules the plants spread out, but at least have something that reminds your other senses of a plant.
Yeah.
Then you have maybe like the 80-20 rule of plants.
Yeah, exactly.
that should work. The other thing that just unavoidably came into my mind when talking about workspaces or rooms in general, as you said, with the rather oppressing or depressing rooms that you've come across, is the psychological factor. So the perception of something that can be seen through the lens of philosophy, but I would say also the psychological factors on how rooms affect us. So what is the distinction in that case?
Well, I mean, philosophy sort of draws from other disciplines. So, like part of my research is I pull from a lot of the current research in psychology and neuroscience to help support ideas in philosophy. So for example, in the 13th century, the medieval theologian philosopher Thomas Aquinas, one of his 3 conditions of beauty was radiance, which consists of light and color. And now there was a recent research that Harvard Business Review put out that said 47% of people in offices that don't have access to natural light feel depressed and tired. So a lot of the research is confirming what a lot of the philosophers said before they could do some of the research, especially research in neuroscience where they use fMRI machines and such that didn't exist.
Yeah.
So for me, it's kind of this continuous plane of, and I think with a lot of ideas concerning beauty, a lot of them, I think it's best to draw from all of these different perspectives for the most complete picture. I know that some other people I've heard have been very careful to say when they give a definition or an explanation of how beauty affects people, that some people are very careful to say what I'm offering is just a biological definition or just a psychological definition. In other words, implying that like all the different disciplines that talk about beauty together form the best picture than any one of them by themselves. I think it's a mistake when we sometimes prioritize science over things like philosophy or others. I think like there's a lot of clarification that comes when we kind of draw from all the sources. So that's kind of my approach, is to do that, even though my official training is in philosophy. And I bring a lot of the history of aesthetics usually to my conversations, whereas like the science tends to be very recent.
Yeah. I've had recently a conversation with someone who works in like behavioral sciences, and so like in raising children, the behavior things, and we've come to the conclusion that the science, I don't think that we are the first one to think of that the science is the method and not the field. So the scientific method is just one tool to figure something out, and most of the ideas probably nowadays we're just trying to prove what has been thought of years or centuries or thousands of years before. So this is the role of science today in many cases.
Yeah. Yeah, and philosophy definitely has like at least in Western philosophy, it has at least a 3,000 year tradition of talking about beauty, which I think also lends weight to the fact that it's so important. It's not something that we just talked about for some strange reason in the 11th century or something, and then we didn't care about it. We've been talking about beauty and art and all these different other related concepts for thousands of years. So they've clearly have been important to us for that long.
Yeah, and I think maybe, obviously, I'm the expert on the field, and in comparison to you, but maybe I think the aesthetics changed from time for more like a biological standpoint, where aesthetic features maybe are important for like reproductive reasons. If we are some prehistoric human trying to find out has the best genetic material, and later in things like arts, where aesthetics can be all over the place or misunderstood. So the field changed a bit.
Yeah, and actually, the key, or what I take to be one of the key ideas of a book called "Survival of the Prettiest" by psychologist Nancy Etkoff. She talks about how our instincts still, are old basically.
Yeah.
So our scientific and medical knowledge has far outpaced our instincts. So things like 1,000 years ago, something simple like a cleft lip, some people may not have known what that was and if it's dangerous or if it's contagious or anything like that. But now we know it's not even a problem. Like, you can fix it if you want or not. But we know it's not like going to harm you, to be near. So I think those kinds of things are really important for us. And she actually talks about how knowing why we have some of these instincts, or even just that we have some of these instincts, is part of the way to maybe overcome it on a micro level. Like we can change our individual habits, even though we can't change the instincts of our species.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think we can still trust our instincts or intuition when it comes to taste and aesthetics? And if you maybe put it as practical into our work?
I think we can in some ways, but I think with taste, what we know is we tend to gravitate toward what is familiar to us. So one of the interesting things is when we say expressions like beauty is in the eye of the beholder, first of all, that's actually, compared to human history, that's actually a fairly recent idea. I mean, Protagoras in ancient Greece said man is the measure of all things, but so there's seeds of it earlier, but the idea of beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and that we determine what is beautiful rather than discover what is beautiful, is kind of a newer idea, only a few hundred years old. But what studies have kind of shown is that we tend to have a lot more agreement universally, like different cultures and so on, about things that occur in nature, which includes human faces, that we tend to agree a lot more. So studies have kind of shown that people will look at a face and find it attractive, and through like a computer image where you can manipulate like an eye or something, and you move an eye like just tiniest fraction of a whatever centimeter, and people now think the face went from being attractive to ugly just with this tiniest little movement. So that's why. So that explains why people kind of tend to agree on things like sunsets and plants and human faces. And it also explains why we tend to have much more disagreement about human-made things like art and architecture and other things, because there's such a variety of things that you can do. And if you're not familiar with it, so two examples of this. One, years ago, back when CDs were the most common form of listening to music.
I remember.
A guy I knew had gone to India, and he got this CD of this Indian hand drummer named Zakir Hussain. And when I first listened to it, it was almost jarring because it was so different than anything I had ever listened to. So a lot of times when our brains don't know how to process because something is so, it doesn't have to be from another culture. It could be someone like from the US who listens to classical music and hears punk for the first time and it just sounds like noise. Like their brain doesn't know how to process it. So they often mistake that for dislike. And so they just kind of dismiss it. But a lot of times, like what's happening is your brain has to learn how to process it. And then you could decide whether you like it or not. But we often don't wait to that second part. So that's one kind of way to explain that the lack of familiarity is what causes, our some of our differences of taste. It's not the only thing, but it's one thing. The other thing about human-made objects is think about like one of the oldest conditions of beauty is proportion. It goes all the way back to Plato and Aristotle, and then it goes through the Middle Ages with Thomas Aquinas, and people still think proportion is very important today. But we can look at an example of a European cathedral from like the Middle Ages. They're often very symmetrical. So they take the most literal idea of proportion. But then you can look at a Japanese rock garden, and there's a kind of harmony there, but it's not symmetrical. It's a very different interpretation of proportion and harmony. But it's not a problem. It's just different. And so that's kind of explains, like we can interpret all the different I kind of joke with my students when we talk about stuff like this in class that what if I were to give you, if this is a painting class and the assignment, I give you all the same material, so you have the same size canvas, you have the same colors of paint, same brushes and everything, but the only assignment is paint whatever you want as long as it incorporates proportion. I mean, it would be, you might have some portraits, some nature things, abstract, like you'd have all kinds of random things that people could come up with. And so that's why with human-made objects, we differ so much on what counts as beautiful. A lot of it has to do with our lack of familiarity. And we make judgments about it because of that. Like we often think that because we do artwork this way, another culture does it a different way that they haven't learned, they don't know, they're not as civilized. Like that was a big kind of debate in like the 17th and 18th centuries amongst a lot of the European philosophers.
Yeah, that's definitely a simplistic viewpoint to see it just, it's foreign, it's underdeveloped or something like that. But I want to kind of twist or not, I'm not disagreeing, but I've seen the same thing, but the other way around is when something, especially in music, I've noticed, and I noticed years and years ago before I even thought about philosophy, is when you're listening to an album and you like it the first time you hear it, it burns out pretty quickly. It's maybe too familiar. It has no long lastingness, and anything that is just a bit more unusual, you get to hear it more and over, and you will grow to like it even more.
Yeah, I mean that's what a lot of times. I mean, there's this. It's hard to say in any one case what did it. There's sometimes our expectations are challenging. Like we expect something to be good, and so when it's not quite as good as we expect, we actually like it even less than we would have otherwise because we expected it to be better, or if we expect it not to be very good but ends up being adequate, like which may not be normally a standard of greatness, but it seems better than it is. So I think expectations can sometimes play a role. But it is definitely I mean, there is a certain, this is what makes it somewhat mysterious because we do have these experiences where something that we loved, our tastes definitely change. Aristotle talks about this in his book, The Rhetoric, way back in ancient Greece, where beauty changes at different stages in our lives. And he gives an example of a young man, a middle-aged man, and an old man, and how beauty affects them. But Aristotle also equates beauty with functionality usually. There's something sort of intrinsically functional about beauty. And so the young man has athleticism, the middle-aged man has military prowess, and the old man sort of, it's almost comical. Like just is trying not to hurt himself, just to like maintain his basic human abilities. as long as he can. And Aristotle connects those human functionings with his view of beauty.
Yeah, beauty is a very broad topic. Yeah, so I've heard a lot on your definitions and then how it applies, and you've said that you do consulting rather or more than you do in the academic sense. Can you show or tell a bit on how companies or the client in the broader sense can have your advantage on how to think on aesthetics and how does it look?
Yeah, I think honestly, the most simplest thing I want people to do is reorient themselves to aesthetics, that it's actually something valuable and practical, not something that is completely mysterious. So that's sort of the first step. But the other thing is people want experiences, whether it's your customer, your client, or your employees. There was a recent survey that people, millennials, 20% of the people interviewed for the survey said they've actually rejected a job offer because of poor aesthetics at the company. Like the offices were ugly and so it helps people if we want to rehumanize our workplace. And I think that's sort of my key phrase. Because it's become so bad where this, I recently saw this Encyclopedia of Psychology online that actually has an expression called organizational dehumanization, because it's become so pervasive that people feel alienated and dehumanized at their jobs, that they're just reduced to a skill set. So if we want people to be more than that, people work harder when they're treated with not just respect. I mean, though obviously respect is very important, but when they're treated as human beings. And part of being human is our fundamental need for aesthetic experience. So offices that are well designed, processes that are, we don't often think of processes as aesthetic, but we can apply. I kind of show how to. Sometimes like it's a very literal aesthetic, like this office could use color or light or something like that. But sometimes it's thinking about aesthetics as a way to examine the quality of different things we do. So like, is there a kind of harmony in this process at work? So it's not so much, it's not like there's going to be for some of these questions, it's not like there's an exact formula that you can then apply. It's more of a way to, think about the quality of what it is you're doing. And so if companies want to engage the whole person of their employees, then they need to consider aesthetics. People and then as far as the spaces go, real practical examples of a guy I know. He said at his work he switched offices just coincidentally about 3 months after we had a conversation like this about aesthetics and the everyday aspect of aesthetics. And a few months later, he messaged me and said, I get what we were talking about that night, because I just switched offices. My window used to look at the ugly side of a building and with a sliver of the sky. And now my office overlooks this park, the harbor, and I have this vast view of the sky. And I feel more productive and happier at work. And so I can't remember who said it, but there was a CEO that basically said the first thing you need to do as a leader in a company is take care of your employees. Then they're going to do the right kind of job to get clients and so on. And I think we kind of have switched that, where we're so focused on efficiency or money or customers and clients that we forget the people that actually work for us, and to make them happier and so on. It's not window dressing. That's where I think some companies miss it. Is if you think of aesthetics as just something like to kind of slap on top of everything else, it just doesn't work. The other thing about it is, so I'm currently working on a book called "Is Your Business Beautiful?", where I talk about how aesthetics infiltrates the three broadest areas of business: people, place, and product. So place is kind of obvious. We've already sort of talked about natural light, plants, and other things. The other thing I will say about that, though, is a lot of these big companies that have a lot of money, they often have a lot of really nice artwork. My question is, how often do people actually look at it beyond just, oh, it's decoration, beyond it's better than a blank wall? I think companies could tap into the artwork that they already have to help, establish connections with among their teams. Like, so imagine beginning not every meeting, but imagine beginning a meeting with a team or something, and you gave them a little assignment. Look at the artwork in our building and pick your favorite and explain why. I mean, just something like that, where you're actually getting people to notice the artwork on the wall that they walk by every day. It's because it's not the, quote unquote proper place to do it. You can look at an artwork for 5 minutes at an art museum, but you're not supposed to do it at work because you're here to work. It's not like you can, every day you spend 2 hours in front of a painting before you get to work. I mean, no, but just taking time to notice these things is very important. I think there's a way to do that. And even just the story of a company. A lot of times people, I think, look at telling the story of a company as simply a way to convey information in a slightly creative way. Business professor named Steve Taylor, near Boston, he and a team wrote an article about how the story of your business needs to be aesthetically pleasing in itself. Not just simply convey information. He gave some really practical reasons for that. One, it's memorable. You could tell a story that conveys information, like put your information in a slightly clever way. People are going to forget it. People do not remember data. That's they might remember like one statistic here and there, but like they don't remember all the data. But you tell it in the form of a story, they remember it. But he also said, if the story has kind of gives an aesthetic experience as well as the information, people will remember it. And the even better thing for businesses is they'll repeat it. Like if there's a really, like a lot of times we see commercials and we just sort of, even if they're like slightly funny or slightly creative, we sort of forget about them. But like ones that really jump out like at us, either because they're really funny or really, something else, like the something about, we may not think of it as aesthetic, but something about the way it made us feel, the scenery. Like we're more likely to tell someone, but we don't often talk about commercials with each other.
No.
But if something is exceptional, we are more likely to do it. But I still remember some stories I was told about the founding of a company, and they don't have to be complicated. There's a company called Fable in Maine. They make this oil for hair, and it's a company based in I believe India. And I met the founder at this event, and the company is called Fable and Maine. And he said the reason why the name exists is because as a kid, his grandmother used to rub oil in his hair while telling him stories. So that you get the name of the company. And I learned this like 3 years ago, and I still haven't forgotten it because it's very simple, but it's something that resonates with people. Even if you didn't have that exact experience, like you can imagine what that would be like. And you can imagine when you're a kid, maybe not your grandmother, maybe it's an aunt or uncle, maybe it's a parent reading to you, So it's just creating this nice kind of added component, and it gets us to remember companies. The expression, you always want to be top of mind for your clients and so on. Well, how do you do that? You create an emotional connection through aesthetics with your clients and customers.
So the storytelling really plays a huge part when it comes to being memorized. And I like the way you put it, that there's more like a natural connection to the story or to the aesthetic story they've been building, rather than just something that feels off. And just the way you've put the example with our face recognition, and if something is slightly off, I think humans are much more likely to tell if something is off or weird or odd than it is if something sits just right.
Yeah, and we are definitely wired to notice those, partly for survival reasons from way back before we, kind of lived in cities and so on. We are wired to spot incongruities and so on for our protection, even if sometimes we didn't need to, like if it was safe, but we're just wired to do that.
Yeah, this is definitely something I can get my hands on a book, and I'm really excited about your upcoming book. And let me tell, when does it come out?
There's not an official date set yet. I'm hoping to finish the final draft like as early as this summer. So we'll see. Hope maybe could be this fall. It could be next spring. We'll see.
Yeah, don't worry. But I'm still excited, and it's something I want to read about. I've seen that you have a publication, as I said before, on digital fashion. I don't know much about this, but how did you get into writing or editing it?
It was just sort of an idea that me and the two other editors kind of came up with back in 2021, whenever 2020 and 2021, where people were just meeting random people online because that was the only way to meet people. I just sort of connected with these two people, and Sarah Bernat and Doris Domoslai-Lantner, and they were doing this monthly symposium on fashion, and they invited me to be part of one of their thing, and we kind of just had a meeting after, like a week or so after that symposium, and I kind of said, maybe we should write something together. And we thought about maybe, and I was just, initially I was mainly just thinking maybe an article or something, and then we thought, well, there hasn't been a book on digital fashion, which kind of it already existed prior to the 2020, but when everybody was stuck inside and spending a lot of their time virtually, digital or virtual fashion became much more prominent, and so it jumped way up in its popularity all of a sudden because of that. So we have the first academic book on digital fashion, but it's not. We wrote it with a more popular audience in mind. So we have about half and half academics and people from industry. And then we also did some interviews with 4 people who work in law, fashion, history, and technology and such that we printed in the book. So it's sort of an interesting kind of thing. And digital fashion, so my chapter does talk about aesthetics, obviously, because when you take the functionality out of clothing, so if you were about to run outside right now, for example, and you saw that it was raining, you might grab, who knows, maybe an ugly raincoat that you just so you can be protected from the rain. Yep. But in the digital world, where you don't need to worry about functionality, like you could, for example, you could change the oil of a digital car in a tuxedo, or something, and who cares, because it doesn't matter. So when you remove functionality from clothing, what do you have left? And I think meaning and aesthetics are what's left. And meaning and aesthetics are certainly important for physical clothing as well, but you also add functionality where maybe you wear something that you don't really like as much, but it serves a purpose. Whereas in the digital world, you don't really need those purposes, at least not yet. maybe one day.
Yeah, what do you think is the current state with things like the metaverse not being as popular as hoped, at least by Meta or something? So I think the whole idea of having like a digital alias of yourself and buying actual digital items like clothing diminished a bit after the pandemic, when the real world was more obtainable again. So what do you think is the current state of it, or maybe the future of digital fashion?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things is like it's kind of strange. Like even after editing the book, I think all three of us still weren't completely sure what we thought about digital fashion in some ways. I mean, I don't want to speak for the other two editors, but at least I know for sure that's how I was. But I think there are some really good practical things. Like there's some statistics that we discovered while working on the book that some people have said that Gen Z wears a garment 7 times before it goes into landfill. And that's not enough.
No.
So, some people I know were saying like, obviously we're going to still continue to wear physical fashion. We're not going to just run around naked, or we're not going to just like it may not ever get like Star Trek where they wear the same outfit basically.
Yeah.
But there are some purposes where we only want something for digital reasons. Like we want a specific image of ourselves on Instagram or like on our website for our bio picture or something like that. So what some people have done before is maybe buy something that they can't quite afford, let's say, and they wear it, they take a picture of it, and then they send it back. Yeah. But a lot of times returned clothing doesn't get resold. It gets trashed.
Unfortunately, yes.
So, and then also, we think about the environmental impact of one garment wouldn't be, if that was all it was, it wouldn't be the end of the world to just think of that one. But if hundreds and hundreds or thousands of people do this, that adds up pretty quickly. So rather than, like buying this physical garment, wearing it for a picture, and then it eventually becomes landfill one day, whether you keep it in your closet for 5 years or throw it out immediately, it doesn't matter. It still eventually has the same fate. So why not just make that garment digital? And then so it's just easier to do it that way, because especially with 2 dimensions. At the time of kind of working on the book, 3-dimension live, I should say, 3 dimensions in terms of a video that an animator makes, that was really high quality. But 3 dimensions on live video, other than like faces where people could put hats on themselves, digital hats or digital glasses, now those work pretty well. But I've actually heard that legs are the hardest. So anyway, 2 dimensions though of a photo, like it's really high quality. So you can get something that looks like it looks just as good as if you were wearing it in the physical world and taking a picture.
Yeah, I can totally see that use case. Especially, I think it's something that is done yet, but I've seen this last year a lot of times, is that people made AI headshots of them, like putting up a selfie and making it into a professional headshot for LinkedIn or something like that. Yeah. And they're wearing a suit, and they would never need to purchase a suit and get it to a photographer. I do prefer the actual photo instead of an AI avatar. But if they want to have a suit on and they don't have a suit, I think that might be a case that is at least a bit related to like a digital fashion piece that you could purchase even.
Yeah, and I mean, that is, you sort of brought up the key idea. Like AI has definitely changed the digital fashion game in a pretty big way. And I think even with the metaverse, people have focused more on AI than that. People are still talking about the metaverse. They're just not using that word. I think that has something to do with Facebook changing its name to Meta. Yeah, I think it's sort of diminished. People didn't want to be associated with that, because like when I first, there was a period of time where I would mention the metaverse and people would say, "Oh, you mean like Facebook?" I was like, "No." They're trying to create a metaverse, not necessarily the metaverse. And so I think people got burnt out on the term because of that. But there's still people that deal in Web3, because the main thing about it is that it's an immersive experience. That's really the key. It's not so like whatever you call it. That's kind of the key idea.
Yeah, definitely. And from like a more perspective on fashion, and you have been talking to a lot of industry people and someone who's in that field, I think in no other field the aesthetics switches as much as in fashion. And what is your opinion and your experience on that, talking to them?
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting because there's people that are always just trying to explore new ways of self-expression, and
Yeah.
I think I do think that's sort of part of the value of digital fashion is that you can explore it in a safe and less costly and less spatial way, because like even if you're someone that wants to like have a wide variety of clothing because you have like all these different physical aesthetics, we have limited space.
Yes.
So even if you have a fairly large closet, it's still finite. Whereas digital, like you can experiment in ways that you can't. And so I think that's that's still the push in fashion is how can we experiment, push the envelope, and even with the digital aspects. Like digital fashion has some advantages. For example, like there were these shoes, these sneakers that are on fire, which you obviously can't do in the physical world. But even doing something like that, it just gives you a new way of looking at it. And I think as long as we think of digital fashion, the metaverse, and AI as tools to make our lives in the physical world better somehow, I think that's really the key, and that's the part I'm kind of hoping for. But what I like about right now with fashion is that because of things like digital fashion, it's forcing people to be a little bit more creative in some ways, I think, and really re-examine what it is we're doing, because fashion had the main fashion industry had sort of become institutionalized, I think, in a bad way. Mm-hmm. Digital fashion kind of became like the Wild West again, where people were just doing all sorts of creative things. It didn't matter where you come from, what country you live in. As long as you had creativity and an internet connection, you're good to go. Like you can. So so for example, like one of the people we interviewed in our book was as a digital fashion designer in Nigeria, and she has gotten, like, she sort of learned how to use the programs. Like she went to school for fashion illustration, but she learned how to use the programs to actually do digital fashion just from watching YouTube videos and such. And so, and like I said, I just want to clarify, like that was just for the programs. Like she already had the other creative elements from her educational background, but and so she was able to work with all sorts of different companies and so on, just from, it didn't matter that she didn't have to travel there. She didn't have to. So there's a lot of advantages. So I just sort of see there's a lot of interesting experimentation happening, and I don't know that we've landed on anything yet, which is in some ways kind of exciting, but
still a pretty fresh field to play on. But I think, as you said it just yet, I've seen my viewpoint on digital fashion a bit more clearer, and seeing the actual value rather than just another way to make money. I kind of connotated it with like Fortnite skins and stuff that you can just buy and rip off people's money so they don't have actually something. This is one part of it, and people just buying things they don't even have in real life. They have no real use once you stop playing the game and everything is gone and you don't have anything because of that. But if you maybe integrate it into some sort, maybe into the online shopping experience where you have probably realistic avatar of yourself and you can see how these clothes fit on your body, and you can have like a one-on-one decision. This fits 100%, and then you can ship it. Maybe this might be a way.
Yeah, no, that's definitely one. And I actually, I'm actually not convinced that, I don't know when this will happen. I mean, maybe this is like a couple decades away, but
Probably.
they're already doing it with books. Like you can buy a book um, and you flip to the back of the book and it says it was printed like 2 days before you got it.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's impossible that with fashion, not all clothing, like there'll be certain things like T-shirts and jeans and stuff that are just sold just like they are now. But I think there might be some specialty things where you'll be able to make a couple adjustments based on your digital, like the digital, like ratio, like it'll be like looking in a mirror, like a digital version of yourself. And you could say, oh, I like this shirt, but I want it a little bit longer, or I like the sleeves a little bit longer. Like I think you'll be able to make some adjustments, and then they can send you the exact version that you want, rather than
that would be even better. Yeah,
because like even with sizes, like where there's small, medium, and large, it's not exact. And then they introduce things like slim fit, and sometimes slim fit fits the way it's supposed to, but sometimes it's way too tight. So it's just you never know how that company is going to interpret those things. So when you can actually see it on your body, and then that's why Warby Parker started doing that with glasses, where they were the first. I think they were the first where you could do digital try-ons, and so digital try-ons are going to be a huge thing. I do think that's some of those ideas of digital fashion. Like it may not, like whether or not everyone's going to buy and own digital fashion, I don't know. It's like a couple years ago, it seemed almost inevitable. Now I'm maybe being a little bit doubling back on it, or something. But I do think the digital aspects of trying on, of digital garments, for Instagram or whatever other social media is still yet to exist. Will be important.
Yeah, the augmented reality part with try-on glasses, and I've tried it myself. It's not the same thing. You don't have the feel of it. You don't know. I'm usually wearing glasses, but you have at least somewhat of the idea if the frame works on your face. Going back to like the proportion, and I've did in my school time years ago a project on like, I don't know, kids science fair or what it is called in the US, on how glass frames fit on each facial structure and something like that. And this is something you can really try on with digital try-ons. You have like thousands of, and these kinds don't work. So I'm never going to buy a circular glass frame.
Yeah, I mean, and like they've already some suggestion. I don't think it's been around long enough to have a big and adopted by enough companies to have a full idea yet. But one of the biggest problems with fashion is overproduction, and so like they make 1,000 of something and only 500 sell, and they work that into their budget, but it's so wasteful. So why not only make make enough for the people that are actually going to buy them, and you reduce waste, and people that get to virtually try on clothing, there's less chance. It's not to say it would go down to zero, but there's less chance that they'll return it because they've already gotten to see what it looks like on them.
Yeah.
So that makes a huge difference.
Yes. And the fashion industry is one of the most wasteful industries there is.
I think it's third in the world.
Yeah, it's so tremendously. It got me into buying more stuff thrifted online, but that's a huge risk. And the other hand, that I'm not sure at all if it fits me perfect.
Yeah.
It's like a wild guess. I get a good price, and it's financially and sustainably more responsible, but I don't know if it fits. Maybe if there is something in between, we would have like a more circular way. So people buy stuff and repurposes instead of wearing it once and sending it to the landfill.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So one last thing before we go to end. You've mentioned some books before. Is there something else a newbie might get into in learning about aesthetics?
I would say a couple. There's a really good, fairly recent, within the last 5 years, book by a philosopher named Crispin Sartwell called "Beauty: A Quick Immersion." It's really affordable too. And the other book, so I'd mentioned Nancy Etkoff. Her book, in terms of science, might be considered a bit dated at this point because it's from 1999. I still think it's a really good book to read, but a slightly more recent one is by Anjan Chatterjee. It's called The Aesthetic Brain, and this kind of gives an idea. There's a lot of good science books, but these are the two that are written for a wide audience rather than for a like a more scientific audience. And his book talks about like why we have this sort of biological need for beauty and art. And it's a really, really good book. And I guess one other book I would recommend is by another public philosopher named Tom Morris. It's called If Aristotle Ran General Motors. He talks about these 4 ideas from Aristotle called transcendentals: beauty, truth, goodness, and unity. And he talks about how they apply in the context of business. And so his section on beauty is quite helpful. I mean, the whole book is really good, but I think the section on beauty is really useful because it helps. Like he talks about some of the things I've mentioned about how if we want to engage the whole person instead of reducing them to just a skill set, beauty is absolutely crucial for that. And yeah, so I think those are sort of the main ones. I mean, I always have a million articles and books I could recommend, but those are probably some of the big ones. One other one I will recommend. It comes in more of the context of architecture. It's called The Shape of Green by Lance Hosey. What I like about this book specifically talks about, the idea of sustainability. If we want, in fact, he actually explicitly says, if it isn't beautiful, it's not sustainable. Because he's talking about how beauty is what helps us, motivates us to change our actions. There was a study at San Francisco State University a little while ago where I think they used the idea of cars as sort of their test, but people would admit that they care about sustainability and so on. But basically, the study proved that that alone does not motivate people to change their behaviors and alter their actions. So it's the aesthetics and the emotional connection that actually gets them to change their behaviors. So if we want people, so even though this book is specifically about architecture, I think it applies, some of the ideas apply more broadly. If you want people to, if a company wants people to change their behaviors, whether it's sustainability, equity, or any kind of issue, it has to have an aesthetic component to it. People just don't change, and so I think that book kind of highlights that in a big way. It gets into some of the other reasons why we care about beauty too, which from an architecture perspective. So I thought that was useful.
Yeah, thank you for expanding my reading list. It's already in I think 900 books or so, which I'm never going to read. So expanding my anti-library. And thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate your insights on it.
Oh, thank you so much.
I'm ready to talk about your upcoming book. Let me know when it's out. I will happily talk to you again, and see you next time.
Yeah, thank you.
If you've enjoyed listening to my podcast, you can show support by following me and hit the bell to never miss out on my latest content. I'd appreciate a positive review too. You can find more of my content on www.emildruth.com. Thanks and bye for now.